Good morning, everybody. Yes, we just need some sound. we don't have any courtroom sound. Then we'll be ready to go. Hi, Tim. Welcome in. I'm so glad you're off today. You're in the shop turning pins. You can listen to this trial. How nice for you have something to listen to. I was going to say, who's the old guy? I don't know who the old guy is. The defendant is in the dark blue suit. Now, I don't know who the old guy is. Maybe he's just helping out with the trial. Oh, you're in the shop a bit later. Okay. Yeah. I do have that form I want to go over with you. It's nothing legal. It's projection stuff, and I don't sales projection stuff, kind of like that. Anyway, why don't we have volume? Hello, people. I have no idea what they're saying. Hopefully we have a jury. Joanna's here. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, she's got that weird court. I didn't know court reporters still do those things where they talk into the mask. That's like so 1800s. This court reporting has evolved so much, and there's still people out there that do it the old-fashioned way. It's weird. Earlier, Tim asked a question in the chat earlier, and I typed nope, never, and YouTube rejected that comment, saying it was spam. All I typed was nope, never. Isn't that weird? All right. Microphone. Maybe we're waiting for the jury to come in. I need to take notes, guys. I need a notebook. I haven't even finished my first cup of coffee. Cup of coffee number 1, you guys. All right. We're taking attendance in the audience. Roll call. Roll call. Gosh, some volume would be so appreciated. I like her hair color. Ooh, that's pretty. That's pretty. Alrighty. And we wait. We hurry up and we wait, right? Of course. If you're not familiar with this, is the trial against Colin Gray. He's the father of, I think the boy's name is Colt Gray. He is a school shooter, and alleged school shooter. He hasn't even been tried yet, the son. But we're going to try the father first for his gun irresponsibility. Y'all know how I feel about that. Today's date is... Okay. He's like, how did I get into this situation? He's rethinking his life's choices, as he should be. Making coffee, yes. Mine is caramel biscotti or something like that. I don't know. I'm loud on the sound bar. That's because we're trying to get volume on this other from the courtroom. I need to put some lights on in here. Lights, camera, action. It's too early for this, you guys. This is true, Tim, and that's what this case is about. Responsible gun ownership. And I'm not against guns totally. Well, I could be easily talked into it, but if you're going to have a gun, you got to do it responsibly. You don't give a 14-year-old an assault rifle. I'm just saying, never, ever, ever. Toffee coffee, yay! That sounds delicious. All right, where is the volume, folks? Somebody press the button. I have a feeling that's going to be the judge here. I'm working on my teeny tiny little Lego thing. Yeah, they're getting the jury seated. Everybody stand, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to be my loyal subscribers until the end of the day, or until you get bored? Okay. I'm not sure why we can't hear this part.
You were about to try it in an indictment that I'm going to summarize to you now. I want you to understand, you will have a copy of the indictment with you during jury deliberations. That document is what controls as far as the language of the charges go. I'm summarizing it now to avoid reading all 29 counts. But you will have it with you in the jury room and understand that that is what is the controlling document regarding the charges, not what I say right now. All of the offenses are alleged to have occurred in Barrow County, Georgia on or about September 4th of 2024. Understand that to all of the charges, Mr. Gray has entered a not guilty plea, that he's presumed innocent, as I told you during jury selection. He is charged with 2 counts of murder in the second degree, it being alleged that irrespective of malice, he did cause the death of Christian Angulo and Mason Skirmerhorn, human beings, while in the commission of cruelty to children in the second degree, as alleged in counts 2 and 4 of this indictment. He is charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, it being alleged while in the commission of an unlawful act, reckless conduct, as alleged in counts 6 and 8 of this indictment, he did cause the death of Richard Aspinwall and Anna Christina Jeremy, human beings, without any intention to do so. He is charged with 2 counts of cruelty to children in the second degree, being alleged that he did, with criminal negligence, cause Christian Angulo and Mason Skirmerhorn, children under the age of 18 years, cruel and excessive physical pain by consciously disregarding the substantial and unjustifiable risk that his act of allowing Colt Gray a minor over whom he had custodial responsibility, access to a firearm and ammunition after receiving sufficient warning that Colgrave would harm and endanger the bodily safety of another, and thereafter Colgrave did shoot said children with said firearm. He was charged with 3 counts of cruelty to children in the second degree, of being alleged that he did, with criminal negligence, cause Melanie Galera Castaneda, Natalie Griffith, and Taylor Jones, children under the age of 18 years, cruel and excessive physical and mental pain by consciously disregarding the substantial and unjustifiable risk that his act of allowing Colgrave, a minor over whom he had custodial responsibility, access to a firearm and ammunition after receiving sufficient warning that Colgrave would harm and endanger the bodily safety of another, and thereafter Colgrave did shoot said children with said firearm. He's charged with 3 counts of cruelty to children in the second degree, it being alleged he did, with criminal negligence, cause Jackson Beaver, Ronaldo Vega, and Nautica Walton, children under the age of 18 years, cruel and excessive physical and mental pain by consciously disregarding a substantial and unjustifiable risk that his act of allowing Colgrave, a minor over whom he had custodial responsibility, access to a firearm and ammunition after receiving sufficient warning that Colgrave would harm and endanger the bodily safety of another, and thereafter Colgrave did discharge a firearm multiple times inside the classroom occupied by said children. He is charged with 11 counts of cruelty to children in the second degree, of being alleged that he did, with criminal negligence, cause Landon Adams, Hayden Bowen, Jalen Brady, Michaela Brown, William Carricker, Marquez Colton, Kendez Lawrence, Martin Moreno Valdemez, Tyler Moon, Ariana Norman, and Brittany Rubio, children under the age of 18 years, cruel and excessive mental pain by consciously disregarding a substantial and unjustifiable risk that his act of allowing Colgrave, a minor over whom he had custodial responsibility, access to a firearm and ammunition after receiving sufficient warning that Colgrave would harm and endanger the bodily safety of another, and thereafter Colgrave did discharge a firearm multiple times inside a classroom occupied by said children. He is charged with 1 count of cruelty to children in the second degree, it being alleged that he did, with criminal negligence, cause Zane Zinni, a child under the age of 18 years, cruel and excessive mental pain by consciously disregarding the substantial and unjustifiable risk that his act of allowing Colgrave, a minor over whom he had custodial responsibility, access to a firearm and ammunition after receiving sufficient warning that Colgrave would harm and endanger the bodily safety of another, and thereafter Colgrave did point said firearm at said child. He's charged with 2 counts of reckless conduct, being alleged he did unlawfully endanger the bodily safety of Stephen Edwards and Cassandra Ryan by consciously disregarding the substantial and unjustifiable risk that his act of allowing Colgrave, a minor over whom he had custodial responsibility, access to a firearm and ammunition after receiving sufficient warning that Colgrave would endanger the bodily safety of another, and thereafter Colgrave did discharge a firearm multiple times inside a classroom occupied by said victim, said disregard constituting a gross deviation from the standard of care which a reasonable person would exercise in the situation. And he is charged with 3 counts of reckless conduct, being alleged he did unlawfully endanger the bodily safety of Richard Aspinwall, Anna Christina Hirami, and David Phoenix by consciously disregarding the substantial and unjustifiable risk that his act of allowing Colgrave, a minor over whom he had custodial responsibility, access to a firearm and ammunition after receiving sufficient warning that Colgrave would endanger the bodily safety of another, and thereafter Colgrave did shoot said victims, said disregard constituting a gross deviation from the standard of care which a reasonable person would exercise in the situation. Now, to that indictment, the defendant has pled not guilty, and he denies each and every allegation therein. This is what forms the issue that you've been selected, sworn, and impaneled to try. Before we begin the trial, I'm giving you these preliminary instructions on the fundamental principles of criminal law. I will also instruct you on the role of the judge, the jury, and the lawyers, and give you an overview of the trial procedure. So the defendant is charged in the indictment with crimes that are violations of certain laws of the state of Georgia. I want to emphasize to you that the indictment, including all of the counts therein, and the plea of not guilty are the legal procedures by which these criminal charges are brought against the defendant. The charges and plea of not guilty are not evidence of guilt, and you should not consider them as evidence for implication of guilt in any crime whatsoever. This defendant is presumed to be innocent. The defendant enters upon the trial of this case with a presumption of innocence in his favor, and this presumption remains with the defendant unless and until it is overcome by the state with evidence that is sufficient to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of a crime or crimes charged. No person shall be convicted of any crime unless and until each element of the crime is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of proof rests upon the state to prove every material allegation of the indictment and every essential element of the crimes charged beyond a reasonable doubt. However, the state is not required to prove the guilt of the accused beyond all doubt or to a mathematical certainty. A reasonable doubt means just what it says. It is a doubt of a fair-minded juror, impartial juror, honestly seeking the truth. It is a doubt based upon common sense and reason. It does not mean a vague or arbitrary doubt, but it is a doubt for which a reason can be given, arising from a consideration of the evidence or a lack of evidence, a conflict in the evidence, or any combination of these. There is no burden of proof upon the defendant whatsoever, and the burden never shifts to the defendant to prove his innocence. If, after giving consideration to all of the facts and circumstances of this case, your minds are wavering, unsettled, or unsatisfied, then that is a doubt of the law, and you must acquit the defendant. But if no doubt exists in your minds about the guilt of the accused, then you would be authorized to convict the defendant. If the state fails to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, it would be your duty to acquit the defendant. Under our system, it is my duty as the trial judge to determine the law that applies to this case and to instruct you, the jury, on the specific rules of law that you must apply to the facts in arriving at a verdict. I'm giving you some of these instructions now. I will give you more detailed instructions after the evidence has been presented and the lawyers have made their closing arguments. During the trial, I may be called upon to rulings or at any time trial is evidence and should not be considered as an indication that we believe this case whatsoever. My only interest in this case is to see that it is fairly tried according to the laws and the Constitution of the state of Georgia and the Constitution of the United States. As expected, the lawyers serve as advocates for their clients and are duty-bound to represent their clients to the best of their ability. The lawyers also serve as officers of this court, and as such, they're bound to follow applicable laws, procedure, and rules of evidence during the trial. If at any time the lawyers believe that any law, procedure, or rule of evidence is being violated, they may make motions for conduct of the trial or objections to the admission of the evidence. In making these motions or objections, the lawyers are simply seeking to fulfill their duties to their clients and to the court. Sometimes these motions or objections may require the court to consider outside your presence the questions raised, and you will be excused to the jury room. We'll try to minimize the number and length of these interruptions and ask for your patience in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, trial procedure in a criminal trial is generally as follows. First, the attorneys for both sides have the opportunity to make what's called an opening statement. This opening statement is not evidence. Remember that what the lawyers say is not evidence, but it's a preview or an outline of what they expect the evidence to be. Evidence can be in the form of testimony given by witnesses or physical evidence that will be labeled with exhibit numbers for identification. After the presentation of all the evidence, the attorneys have the opportunity to make what's called the closing argument or summation. At that time, the attorneys may suggest which laws are applicable and how they should be considered in light of the evidence, and point out to you certain parts of the evidence that they think are favorable to their position. The goal of a closing argument is to persuade you to decide the case in their favor. Following the closing arguments, I'll charge you more specifically on the law that applies to this case. I will then ask you to retire to the jury room to deliberate and reach a verdict. You, the jury, have a very important role. It is your duty to do the case and to apply to those facts. I'll instruct you on the laws that apply to this case, but you must determine on the evidence. The issue is the means by practice or disproved. Evidence consists of two things, testimony and exhibits. Testimony is the testimony that you will hear under oath from those who take the witness stand. Exhibits are those documents, photographs, or other physical items of evidence that are admitted into evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, the object of the trial is to discover the truth. During the trial, the admission of evidence will be governed by certain rules of evidence. Those rules were established with one prominent purpose in mind, and that purpose is the discovery of truth. Consequently, the rules of evidence seek to assure that only the best and highest evidence is admitted for your deliberation. During the trial, the attorneys have a right to object to the admission of evidence if they believe its admission would violate a rule of evidence. I will admit or exclude the evidence according to those rules. If I overrule an objection, this means you are allowed to consider the evidence being offered. On the other hand, if I sustain an objection, this means that you may not consider the evidence being offered. You should consider only that testimony and only those exhibits that are admitted. And you should draw no inferences and make no assumptions about the evidence objected to if the objection was sustained. In the event that you hear or see inadmissible evidence before an objection can be made and ruled upon, if the objection is sustained, I would instruct you to disregard it. You should disregard that evidence entirely in your deliberations and in reaching your verdict. You, the jury, must determine the credibility and believability of the witnesses. It is for you to determine which witness or witnesses you will believe and which witness or witnesses you will not believe if there are some whom you do not believe. In determining the credibility or believability of witnesses, you may consider all of the facts and circumstances of the case. The manner in which the witness testified, their interest or lack of interest in the case, their means and opportunity for knowing facts about which they testify, the nature of the facts about which they testify, the probability or improbability of their testimony, and the occurrences about which they testify. You may also consider their personal credibility insofar as it may appear to you from the trial of the case. As the fact finder, it is for you alone to determine what testimony you will believe and what testimony you do not believe. Now, it's important that you pay close attention to the evidence as it is presented during the trial. If at any time you are unable to hear or see evidence being presented, or if you're suffering from any discomfort that diverts your attention, please feel free to inform me and we'll do whatever is necessary to assure that you're able to hear and see the evidence being presented and to give it your undivided attention. If you are in need of a recess at any time, please raise your hand and let us know. We'll take a break. It is vitally important that you're as comfortable as possible so that you can focus on the evidence as it's being presented. It's important that you view this evidence with an open mind at all times and reach no final conclusions until the trial is over. Do not jump to conclusions before all of the evidence is presented. Remember that during the course of the trial, it would be improper for you to discuss this case with anyone or to allow anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence or hearing. This applies even to discussions amongst yourself in the jury room or elsewhere before actual deliberations begin at the end of the trial. Now, the bailiffs have been asked to provide you with pencils and notepads for your use during trial. You may take notes, but you are not required to do so. If you decide to take notes, please remember that note-taking should not divert you from paying full attention to the evidence and evaluating witness credibility. Your observation of the witnesses during their testimony can be vital to your determination of the believability of their testimony. The notes that you take are free. It's the duty of each juror to recall the evidence. And while you may consider another juror's notes to refresh your memory, you should rely on your own recollection of the proceedings. Do not be influenced by the notes of other jurors unless their notes help you in determining your own independent recollection. Notes are not entitled to any greater weight than the recollection or impression of each juror as to what the evidence may have been. After the trial is over, the notes will be collected and destroyed. I instruct you from the witness stand and the exhibits that are admitted into evidence. So understand you are not to visit any scenes that may be depicted by the evidence. You're not to use the internet or the books for any reason, to do any research for your deliberations. I've implored you during jury selection. I'm going to say it again, pretend like it's 1980 to the best that you can. Stay off the internet, stay off of social media. Do not discuss this case with anyone other than your fellow jurors during deliberations. Now, the last thing I want to say is go with the flow. And I say that so that you'll be less frustrated. There will be times during the trial where the attorneys want to talk about something outside of your presence, and sometimes that requires me sending you to the jury room. Sometimes we'll take a break, and I'll say it's a 10-minute break, and you're still sitting in the jury room 20 minutes later wondering what's going on. Something's come up that we need to discuss outside of your presence. You may be at your lunch break, and I tell you it's going to be an hour, and it turns into an hour and 20 minutes. We're not wasting time. We're talking about things that we can't do in front of you. You may be on a recess, come into the courtroom, and something comes up, and I've got to send you right back out. I just tell you this to set an expectation. The trials are fluid, and I want you to just, to the best of your ability, go with the flow. Understand that things are going to come up that I have not heard before. I have not heard all the evidence in this case. I've heard very little of it. And sometimes I'm going to need to inquire with the lawyers just so I can speak freely with y'all outside the court. Okay? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the attorneys for opening statements, starting with the state. Thank you.
All right, this is the exhibit I'm going to be showing.
Thank you.
Morning. Before we start, one thing needs to be abundantly clear. This is not a case about holding parents accountable for what their children do. That's not what this case is about. This case is about this defendant and his actions. His actions in allowing a child that he has custody over access to a firearm and ammunition after being warned that that child was going to harm others. This is a case about his actions and the horrific consequences of them. I'm going to take you now to September 4th, 2024. It was a Wednesday morning. It was just after the Labor Day holiday. A 14-year-old boy enters Apalachee High School here in Barrow County. It's a new school for him. In fact, he had been out of school completely the entire previous year. And while the school year was already a month old, this was only his 5th day attending school. As he walked through the crowded hallways, he carried his book bag in front of him. And hidden inside that book bag was a 6-hour M400 AR style rifle. This 14-year-old boy has an evil plan. He goes to his first period class, located here. It's a computer science class. He sits down at the table, and he puts his book bag with the rifle next to him. At some point during the class, he gets up and approaches the teacher, and he asks her, "Y'all had any active shooter drills?" She says, "Yeah, actually, we had one last week. You were absent." He goes back and sits down. Teacher ponders on this a bit. It's an odd question to ask. She doesn't know this boy very well. He's only been there 5 times. So she emails the school counselor, and she courtesy copies her direct supervisor, the vice principal, about the question the boy had asked. At the end of class, at 9:38, this boy picks up his book bag with the rifle in it, carries it in front of him out of the class, heading to his second period class. But that first period teacher stewed on it a little more And between the class breaks, she decided, I'm going to go up to the office and find the vice principal and talk to her. But at this very moment, that 14-year-old boy is entering his second period class. It's 9:40 a.m. He takes a seat and he puts that book bag with the rifle in it next to him. 14 minutes later, at 9:54 a.m., that boy gets up, grabs his book bag, and he tells the teacher, I'm going to go to the counseling office, which is located down here. He leaves the class, but he doesn't go down to the counseling office. He goes down what's called J Hall, and he enters the boys' bathroom here. He goes into a stall, locks the stall, and he hides there for the next 26 minutes. Now, 4 minutes before he left second period, at 9:50 a.m., the boy's mother calls the school counselor, who's in this suite here. Now, the boy's mother doesn't live here in Winder. She's down in Fitzgerald, Georgia, which is in South Georgia. It's a 4.5-hour drive from here. But the boy that morning has sent some text messages that will bother her. And he's now not answering his phone when they call or try and get a reply. She's worried about his emotional well-being. Now, the counselor had actually met this boy the week before. He had a panic attack at school, went to her office, and was too upset to go back to class. So the counselor and the mother talk on the phone for 8.5 minutes about this boy's emotional well-being. And at the very end of that call, at the end of the 8.5 minutes, for the first time, that mother mentions to the counselor that this boy has access to firearms. This sends a red flag up to the counselor. She immediately hangs up the phone and she calls the vice principal. This phone call was ended at 9:59 a.m. But remember, the boy had already left the classroom 5 minutes before that phone call ended. 5 minutes before the mother said anything about firearms. And he's hiding in this bathroom where no one knows where he is. 7 minutes after the call ends, at 10:06, the vice principal and the school resource officers arrive at his second period class. Now remember, this boy that the vice principal and the SROs are looking for has only been to that class 5 times. And there's another child in that class who has an almost identical name. And that boy has also left the classroom to actually go to the bathroom. He signed out to go to the bathroom. Second period teacher thinks that's who they're asking for and says he just went to the bathroom. Gives the vice principal that boy's backpack. And the vice principal and the school resource officers head down to the bathroom to find that boy. That boy's just up in the sinks. He comes out with them, they talk to him, they search his book bag, and they realize this isn't the right kid. He doesn't have computer science for first period. They go back to the class. They arrive there at 10:11, back to the second period class. The teacher then tells them, oh, that child has gone to the counseling office, located here, because that's where he said he was going. Vice principal, school resource officers go to the counselor's office. Of course, they haven't seen him. He never made it there. At this point, they decide that they're going to go look on the security cameras, see if they can locate this boy. They go down this hall, and it's not on this map. You'll see a more full map later. So around this area is where the vice principal's office is that has access to the security cameras. So they're about right here. At 10:18, the vice principal emails the second period teacher. When did he leave your class? They're trying to locate when exactly he left because remember, this boy's only been there 5 days. They don't really know what he looks like. So they're trying to find him on video surveillance equipment. So she emails at 10:18, when did you leave your class? 2 minutes later at 10:20, second period teacher responds, He left towards the beginning of class. That's 10:20 a.m. when that email was sent. 1 minute later, at 10:21 a.m., that boy exits the bathroom he'd been hiding in. He's now wearing yellow work gloves. He's carrying that Sig Sauer M400 AR style rifle concealed with a poster board. And he walks back down J Hall towards his second period class. Now, when the vice principal had left that class to go look for him in the counselor's office, she shut the door behind her, and the door automatically locked. This boy is not going to be able to get into his second period class. But next door was another classroom, right here. It was taught by Cassandra Ryan and Stephen Edwards. And inside that class were the following students: Landon Adams, Christian Angulo, Jackson Beaver, Hayden Bowen, Jalene Brady, Michaela Brown, William Carricker, Marquez Coleman, Melanie Delira Castaneda, Natalie Griffith, Taylor Jones, Kendez Lawrence, Martin Moreno Galdamez, Tyler Moon, Ariana Norman, Brittany Rubio, Mason Skirmerhorn, Ronaldo Vega, and Nautica Walton. At 10:20, Mason Skirmerhorn, who's in that room, leaves to go to the bathroom. And the door does not shut behind him. Mason goes down this hallway. He actually passes the shooter in the hallway, and Mason goes into the bathroom. The shooter goes to his second period class. The door's locked. He knocks on the door. A student in that class gets up, goes to the door to open it for him, but sees through the class at the last second him standing there with that rifle. She steps back from the door. At that exact moment, the teachers also reach the door because they've been looking for this boy, remember? And she sees through the glass him standing there outside their door with that Sig Sauer M400. She immediately presses a button on a lanyard that's around her neck that locks down the school. The boy then steps next door to the Ryan Edwards classroom, and he opens fire. He fires discriminately through the classroom. He hits the following victims: Melanie Delira Castaneda is seated here. This is the door he comes into. She's seated here. He strikes her in the left arm with a bullet. Natalie Griffith is seated here. Strikes her in the shoulder, the upper arm, and the forearm. Taylor Jones, seated here, struck through the leg. Christian Angulo, seated here by the door. He shoots him through the wrist, into the chest. He would not survive. Jackson Beaver, Ronaldo Vega, and Nautica Walton were also in that room. They were struck by shrapnel from the bullets ricocheting around the room. When he finishes shooting, the shooter then leaves. He runs down J Hall. He's looking for more victims. Christina Iermy is a teacher in this classroom. She hears the commotion. She steps out, looks down the hall. The shooter is about here. He shoots her through the neck before she can get back in the room. She would not survive. Richard Aspinwall is coming out of this room on I Hall. He hears the commotion. Joining him is David Phoenix coming out of this room. The two of them start coming down the hall here. They don't get very far because the shooter has now reached this point. He turns his gun down this hallway and sends a hail of bullets towards them. As they dive towards their room, David Phoenix is shot in the hip and in the foot. Richard Aspinwall is shot in the side and the upper chest. He would not survive. The shooter continues down the hallway. He gets to here, tries to get in this door, it won't open. He turns back and heads this way. At this point, Mason Skirmerhorn is still in that bathroom. He doesn't know what's happening. He comes out of the bathroom, and he turns away from the shooter, doesn't even see him, heading back toward his second period class. The shooter takes aim from behind, shoots at him, but misses, hits the wall above and in front of Mason. This startles Mason, and he turns and runs the other way, directly at the shooter. He's shot point blank range. He would not survive. Shooter's here. He then aims his gun down K Hall. And Zane Zinni is locked out of his classroom here. He's in the shooter's sights. Now, before the shooting started, two school resource officers, Donovan Boyd and Brandon King, were in the vestibule area, the atrium, I think they call it, in this area, right outside the vice principal's office. They're waiting for the vice principal to find this boy and go get him. They're waiting out there in the atrium, and they hear the gunshots coming from this. And those two deputies ran towards the gunshots. They come down this hallway here, and they turn the corner, and they see the shooter here with his rifle aimed towards Zane Zinni. And they yell for him to drop the gun and get on the ground. And he complies before he gets a shot off at Zane Zinni. The officers rush down here, they secure him, and they secure that 6-hour M400 AR style rifle. And out of his pockets, they find 3 more magazines loaded. Now, remember when the shooter had tried to enter his second period class and the teacher pushed that button? Well, that sent an alarm. It immediately notified law enforcement all over the county. Within minutes, an enormous police and medical response descended upon that school. It was a dramatic and intense scene as the school was cleared and the wounded evacuated. But to make matters worse, they were getting additional threats, fake threats, about other shooters at all the other schools in the county. Law enforcement now had to be diverted to these other schools to clear and make sure people were safe. Barrow County deputies Anthony Townsend and Brandon Bazinet were sent to clear Winder Barrow High School here in Winder. Once they cleared it, then they went next door to Russell Middle School. They cleared it. And just as they were finishing that up, they got a call from their superiors. I was trying to say superior and supervisor at the same time. Their superiors to go to a residence in Barrow County and secure it. They were just given an address. They don't know why they're going there. They were just told, go to this residence and secure it until other officers can arrive. Where they're going is the shooter's house. And when they get there, Colin Gray meets them in the garage. And without any prompting, because remember, they don't know why they're there. They don't know who this guy is. Without any prompting, he blurts out, I knew it. My little girl just texted me. She's in middle school. She said we're in lockdown. I'm like, God Almighty, please tell me your brother didn't do something. Agents with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations arrived shortly thereafter, and they begin a search of the house. And inside that house, in that 14-year-old boy's bedroom, on the wall, they find this shrine, for a better word. Those pictures are all of the same person, Nicholas Cruz. Nicholas Cruz was the person that in 2018 went into Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, with an AR-style rifle. And there he killed 17 students and faculty and wounded another 17 more. Investigators look at this and they begin to wonder, who is this kid? His name is Colt Gray. He's the oldest son of Colin Gray. His mother is Marcy Gray. He has a younger sister named Jenny, who was 13 years old at the time of this incident. She was actually going to Heyman Morris Middle School, which is directly next door to Apalachee High School. He has a little brother, Coley, who was 8 years old, was going to his elementary school. Now, Colt Gray, raised here in Bexar County, he went to Statham Elementary School up until fourth grade, up till the beginning of fourth grade. And in the beginning of fourth grade, he was withdrawn from Statham Elementary School because the family had moved, and they moved to Gainesville. And he goes to White Sulphur Elementary School, but only for a few months. Because again, the family moved again. Now they moved to Cumming. And he goes to Chattahoochee Elementary School. But again, only for a few months. In March of 2020, they moved to Fitzgerald in Ben Hill County, Georgia. It's South Georgia, kind of east of Tifton. Because there, Marcy's mother and father, Deborah Polhamus and Charlie Polhamus, live. And Deborah Polhamus's mother, Marcy's grandmother, Colt's great-grandmother, had passed away and left the house. So there's an available house for them to live in. So they moved down to Fitzgerald on March 4th of 2020. But if you remember that day, that's the week before COVID shut everything down. That was the end of Colt's fourth grade year. Fifth grade. Now this is going to be the fall of 2020 into the spring of 2021. That's fifth grade year. Colt goes to Ben Hill Elementary School. But remember, this is when COVID is raging, and it's mostly virtual. He's mostly at home using the school computers. The next year, sixth grade, fall of 2021, he starts a new school, Ben Hill Middle School, because he's in sixth grade now. And early in that year, 11-year-old Colt, at home, using the school computer, searches the word abuse. A few hours later, he searches the phrase, how to kill your dad. That was on September 19th, 2021, 3 years before he took that rifle into Apalachee High School. School resource officers sent to the house to check on him. Everything's fine. It was just a mistake. Misunderstanding. But a defects case is opened on the family. But the family leave Fitzgerald and move to Jackson County 6 weeks later in November of 2021. So in November, they come up here to Jackson County, Georgia. But they don't enroll the kids in school until February of 2022. Colt finishes out his sixth grade year at West Jackson Middle School. Seventh grade, fall of 2020, 1 year after he searched How to Kill Your Dad, and 2 years before Apalachee, 12-year-old Colt starts Jefferson Middle School. It's his seventh school in 4 years. That Halloween, halfway through the semester, Marcy, his mother, gets drunk, passes out in the car in the driveway of the house. Jenny and little Coley are trick-or-treating, and they get separated. Coley gets lost. Authorities are called. Another defects case is opened on the family. Marcy and the two siblings, little Coley and Jenny, They moved back down to Fitzgerald in November of 2022. But Colt stays up in Jackson County with the defendant. DFAC's caseworker Tamika Mitchum is monitoring Marcy and the two siblings down in Fitzgerald. And DFAC's caseworker Michaela Anderson is monitoring Colt and the defendant up here in Jackson County. And starting in March of 2023, during his 7th grade year, Michaela Anderson visits his residence monthly. Every month, she shows up to check on Colt, see how he's doing, check on his well-being. And the defendant always says the same thing. Colt's doing well in school. He doesn't need any counseling. But that's not really true. Colt is full of intense anger, and he's having a hard time dealing with it. On Sunday, May 21st, 2023, this is the end of Colt's 7th grade year at Jefferson Middle School. In fact, classes had ended that Friday, and this is that Sunday. And on that Sunday, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office gets a tip from the FBI. There's an app that you can get on your computer called Discord. And this app is popular with video game enthusiasts, but it allows people from all over the world to talk to each other on the computer. And users in a chat room on this app, a true crime chat room, report to the FBI that another user is threatening to shoot up an elementary school. This user is threatening to do this. It says they have access to guns. It says they plan to do it within the next 2 years. The FBI passes this tip on to Jackson County because when you look at the IP address of that user, it comes back to a Colin Gray and an address in Jackson County. Deputy Justin Elliott and investigator Dan Miller go to that address. Now, the current resident of that address has 2 daughters, and they don't use Discord. But they're new to that address, and they keep getting the mail of the previous tenant, Colin Gray. Deputy Elliott and investigator Miller then go to his new address. They speak with the defendant at his house, and they tell him about this threat on Discord. And they ask him, does Colt have access to guns? Which he does. But the defendant says that he and Colt, they take this school shooting stuff very seriously. And Colt denies to these officers that it was him on Discord. He says his Discord account got hacked. The defendant makes no mention to these officers that less than 2 years before, Ben Hill officers had also been to his house when Colt searched how to kill your dad, also on a computer. But before they left, investigator Miller asked the defendant to please restrict Colt's access to guns. Less than 3 weeks later, when DFAC's agent Michaela Anderson goes back out to the house like she's been doing monthly to meet with the defendant, and again, she asks, how's Colt doing? He makes no mention to her of this visit from the sheriff's office. 2 weeks after that, on June 23rd, the defendant signs a lease to move out of Jackson County into Winder. But he doesn't tell Michaela Anderson he was planning on doing that, and he never tells DFACs that he did do that. She just keeps going to an empty house. 2 months later, in August, it's time for another school year. Colt's not at Jefferson Middle School anymore. 13-year-old Colt is enrolled at Heyman Morris Middle School. This is the middle school in Winder that's directly next door to Apalachee High School. This is supposed to be his 8th grade year. But he's withdrawn from that school 3 days later. He never attends it. Instead, Colt goes back down to Fitzgerald to live with his mother, Marcy. And while he's in Fitzgerald, Colt is still filled with anger. He's still having trouble dealing with it. He's becoming violent. He breaks windows. He cuts up things with a knife. He even starts cutting on himself with that knife. These are the scars from after he was arrested after the shooting a year later. Colt's grandfather, Charlie Polhamus, is at his wit's end. He actually calls the police on Colt. And at the beginning of October 2023, just a few weeks after being in Fitzgerald, Colt comes back up here to Winder to live with the defendant. But he does not attend school. 2 weeks later, on October 13th, down in Fitzgerald, Marcy, who you remember is still being checked on by DFACS, tests positive for drugs. She's going to lose the kids. DFACS worker Tamika Mitchum, who's been monitoring Marcy, calls the defendant, tells him to come down to Fitzgerald to pick up the other two kids, Jenny and Coley, and bring them back up. He now has sole custody of the three kids. Marcy's to have no unsupervised contact. But Tamika Mitchum also stresses to the defendant to get the kids in school and counseling as soon as possible. He does neither of these things. 3 weeks after the kids are brought up here, on November 6th, 2023, back down in Fitzgerald, Marcy basically goes crazy. She wants to come up to Winder. She wants her mother, Deborah Polhamus, to bring her to Winder. And Deborah Polhamus says, "You ain't going to Winder." So Marcy duct tapes her mother to the chair, steals her car, drives up to Winder, goes to the defendant's house, keys his truck, and gets arrested. She spends some time in the Bexar County Jail before she's transferred to the Ben Hill County Jail for the charges down there. And while she's down there, she's released on bond to an inpatient drug treatment facility in South Georgia. She has no supervision during this time over Colt. Now back up here in Barrow County, it's been a chaotic few months for Colt. But that Christmas, after the cuttings and the things with the Jackson County and the moms going crazy, testing positive drugs, that Christmas, the defendant, 7 months after he was told by Jackson County Sheriff's Office of possible school shooter threats and being asked to restrict Colt's access to guns, the defendant buys and gives 13-year-old Colt that Sig Sauer M400 as his Christmas present. And he allows Colt to keep this rifle propped up in Colt's room. Now, in February of 2024, 2 months after this Christmas, in February, Colt's siblings, Jenny and Coley, are finally enrolled in school. They've already missed 4 months of school, but they're finally enrolled. Colt does not attend. He misses the entirety of his 8th grade year. But during that spring, when Colt's not in school, the defendant continues to buy accessories for his Christmas present rifle. He buys a Sightmark Ultra Shot sight to go on the rifle. He buys a bungee sling to go for the rifle. He buys an accessory rail set. He buys a 45-degree offset iron sights. And he buys a lot of ammunition. That summer, 2024, Colt is now 14. It's just a few months before he takes his Christmas present rifle into Apalachee High School. July 6th of that summer, Marcy gets out of rehab in Fitzgerald, and the defendant picks her up and brings her back up to Winder. It's her first contact with Colt in 9 months. Now, Colt who had always been quick to violence and suffered from severe anxiety, begins to spiral out of control. He's fighting with his father. He's throwing things at people. He's putting holes in his sister Jenny's door. But the rifle stays in his room. On July 20th, Colt has a panic attack at the house. He comes in the living room and he actually asks his parents to call 911 for him. But they don't call anyone. His mental health becomes so bad that the defendant and Marcy together begin giving Colt Marcy's prescription for Zoloft. They're just giving it to him themselves. They worry he's suffering from depression, but they don't take him to see a doctor. It's around this time that Colt puts those pictures of Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter, up in his room. And the rifle stays in his room. August 14th, 2024, 3 weeks before the shooting. It's Colt's first day of Apalachee. School had started 2 weeks earlier, but this was Colt's first day. He missed the first 2 weeks. He had not been inside of school for 15 months, not since the sheriff's office came to his door about the threats to shoot up a school. And that morning, Colt again is spiraling out of control. He sends a text message to the defendant at 6:49 a.m. He writes, "I'm sick of your shit. This is the fucking end for you. You fucking caused this." 2 minutes later, at 6:51 a.m., he sends this text message to the defendant. "Whenever something happens, just know the blood is on your hands." His first day of school. And the rifle stays in his room. The very next day, August 15th, Colt skips school. He gets into a fight with his mother, Marcy, when she goes into his room to try and get the rifle away from him. With rifle in hand, he shoves his mother to the ground and she hits her head on the wall. She then asked the defendant to please take Colt's rifle and lock it up. He never does. Marcy then has had enough. She goes back to Fitzgerald, once again, leaving Colt into the care of the defendant. And the rifle stays in his room. The next day, after this altercation with his mother, Colt asked the defendant to get him 150 rounds of ammunition. The defendant responds to him, well, he needs to pay for everything first, but he will. He will. Now, Marcy's down in Fitzgerald, the defendant's up here, but they're still communicating with each other by phone and text. And they begin to worry that Colt needs to be institutionalized. He needs to go to an inpatient facility. He's so bad. They search for places and resources, but the defendant never follows through. He never takes Colt to see any professional, and the rifle stays in his room. August 26th, 9 days before the shooting, Colt has another panic attack, this time at school. It's one I referred to earlier in the opening. It's only his 4th day he attended school. Remember, he missed the first 2 weeks of school, and he skipped school 5 of the next 8 days. Colt leaves his second period class that day. He goes to the counselor's office. He's too distressed to go back to class. They call his father, but his father can't come to get Colt. Colt ends up spending the entire school day in the counselor's office. That night, on the phone, Colt asked his grandmother, Deborah Polhamus, if he did something terrible, would she still love him? This bothered her so much, Deborah Polhamus, that the next morning she drives up to Winder from Fitzgerald. And on the way, she calls Advantage Behavioral Health Systems. It's a crisis stabilization inpatient place in Athens, Georgia. She talks to them on the phone, and they tell her, Marcy's in Fitzgerald. The defendant is here. They tell her that Saturday is a great day to come in because most people don't realize they're actually open on Saturdays and you can just walk right in. But he needs to be brought by a parent. Deborah asked the defendant to take Colt on that Saturday, which would have been August 31st. He doesn't. Wednesday, August the 28th, Colt skips school. This is 2 days after that panic attack, the day after Deborah Polhamus is called crisis advantage behavioral. Colt tells the defendant that he hears voices telling him what to do. This is 3 days before the defendant is supposed to take Colt to advantage behavioral and 1 week before the shooting. At 7:44 a.m. that morning, Colt texts the defendant, I have to kind of dance around the inconvenient truth at times. I have no control over what these things say and tell me to do. And the rifle stays in his room. Colt skips school again the next day, which is a Thursday. That Friday and Monday, school is closed for the Labor Day holiday. And that Tuesday, September 3rd, Colt skips school again. That brings us back around to that Wednesday morning, September 4th, 2024. Those pictures of Nicholas Cruz are still on his wall, and that rifle is still in his room. The defendant leaves to take little Coley to school. Jenny leaves on her bus for Heyman Morris Middle School, which again is directly next door to Apalachee High School. Colt gets his rifle, gets extra magazines, puts them in his book bag. He wraps up around the part of the rifle that sticks out of the bag, and he takes a hat with a Fender guitar logo on it, a stocking hat, and puts it over the top so you can't see it. And then he heads out to meet the bus. A few hours later, just like he'd been warning he was going to do, Colt murders 4 people. Now, after the shooting, which I'll remind you happened at 10:22 a.m. So after that, at 11:01 a.m., Jenny, the daughter, texts her father, 3 people are dead at the high school. The defendant texts back a minute later, how do you know? How do you know? She responds, people are saying, and there was an email. Please, I'm scared. She then texts the defendant, I can't call you. I'm in a lockdown. At 12:19, the defendant texts Jenny. Jenny, have you talked to your brother? Jenny replies, no. But I think we're thinking the same thing, and I don't want to talk about it over text. 1 minute later, the defendant replies, yep, 10-4. I'll be here in just a few. Let me know when you get back in the building and when I can come get you. A few minutes later, the defendant arrives at his home, not Jenny's school, not Apalachee. He goes home and he runs straight to Colt's room. He has to confirm what he already knows. He goes straight to Colt's room to see if that gun is missing. And it is. Moments later, Anthony Townsend and Brandon Bazinet arrive at his house, and he utters those words, "I knew it." Now, ladies and gentlemen, the charges in this case, it's the same acts that he did. The charges are divided up between whether or not the victim of those acts was a child or an adult. If they're a child, the charges that stem from their victimization would be cruelty to children, because you have to be under 18 for cruelty to children to apply. But through his negligence of allowing Colt to have this gun, knowing what Colt was going to do, he caused cruel and excessive physical pain to the children. That's cruelty to children in the second degree. If that cruelty to children in the second degree results in death, like with Mason Skirmerhorn and Christian Angulo, that is murder in the second degree. So the cruelty and the murder in the second go together. They apply to the children. Two adult deceased, Christina Irmy and Richard Aspinwall. They're above the age of 18. The defendant is charged with reckless conduct, same act, recklessly allowing his child, and he knew this was going to happen, to harm someone else. And because they died during the commission of reckless conduct, that is involuntary manslaughter. So for the adults, it's involuntary manslaughter based on reckless conduct. All the other children who were either struck by a bullet or in that Ryan Edwards classroom when the bullet started flying, they're the victims of charges for cruelty to children in the second degree, either by the physical pain it caused or the emotional anguish it caused. And the adults that were injured or put in harm's way, David Phoenix, Stephen Edwards, and Cassandra Ryan. Those three adults, they're charged, they're the victims of the reckless conduct. Now, at the end of the case, we'll come back before you and ask you to render a verdict of guilty. Thank
Mr. Hobbs?
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Before we talk about evidence, before we talk about the law, we have to begin with what every person in this courtroom already knows. What happened at Apalachee High School was tragic. It was horrific, it was terrifying, and it was heartbreaking. Nothing said in this courtroom can change that. Nothing that I'm going to say is meant to diminish that. You're going to hear emotional testimony. You'll see photographs. You'll see videos. You'll hear about the fear, the chaos, and the terror that Colt Gray inflicted on that school in this community. But your job is not to decide whether or not that was tragic. We all know that it was. Your job is to decide something much more specific. Your job is to decide whether or not Colin Gray knew what Colt was going to do. Because the state is not just prosecuting the shooter in this case, they're prosecuting the father as well. I want you to remember something as we begin. The courtroom is not a place where we punish people because we're angry, where we punish people because we're grieving. It's not a place where we punish people because we feel someone has to pay. This is a place where we follow the law. And the law requires proof, and the law requires evidence. And the law requires that the state prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. That burden never shifts, not for a single moment. The state's theory will be simple. They'll tell you that Colt Gray allowed his son access to firearms and ammunition. Colin Gray had warning signs, and then Colin Gray knowing that these were warning signs, consciously disregarded those warning signs. That he should have known his son would, not could, that his son would harm someone. And because the son later committed this school shooting, therefore Colin Gray must be guilty, must be criminally negligent, because he knew this would happen. That's their theory. But what you'll learn from the evidence is that case is not that simple. The evidence will show a teenager who is struggling mentally, a teenager who is deceptive, a teenager who hid his true intentions from everyone, from his family, from his counselor, from his siblings, from DFACS, from law enforcement, and most especially from his father. The evidence will show a father who did not ignore his child. He did not abandon his child. He did not turn his back on his child. The evidence will show between Colin Gray and Colt Gray daily contact, daily effort, and active steps by Colin Gray to seek mental health intervention for his son through the school. The evidence will show that the most important facts, the planning of this shooting, the concealment of this shooting, and the timeline of this shooting were hidden by Colt Gray from his father. That's the difference between tragedy and criminal liability. And this case is about whether the state can prove criminal liability by showing that Colin Gray knew that Colt was going to do this, knew that Colt was going to harm someone else. You cannot hold someone criminally responsible for failing to predict what was intentionally hidden from them. You'll learn about Colt Gray's state of mind that at the time no one knew. You will learn that months before the shooting, Colt had notes hidden on his cell phone from April of 2024, private notes that appear to be the planning stages of this shooting. Those notes were not known to Colin Gray. Those notes were not shared with Colin Gray. There is no evidence of that. You will learn something else. The plans reflected in those notes show that the shooting was initially planned for February of 2025 to coincide with the anniversary of the Parkland High School shooting committed by Nicholas Cruz. The plan reflected in those notes was that that time was going to be when the shooting happened, not in September of 2024. Something changed. The evidence will suggest and support that Colt accelerated his plan. And there's evidence suggesting that that acceleration was tied to the fact that Colin Gray was actively seeking mental health treatment for his son through the school at that time. There are emails to the counselor. There's paperwork he filled out. There was already in motion, already in place, an appointment for Colt to meet with the counselor and to meet with the mental health specialist the very next day, September 5th. Colin Gray did not know about the plans. Colin Gray did not know that Colt was planning to do this and that he would in fact go harm someone else. The behavior that Colt exhibits, the behavior that you'll find from his notes in his cell phone, from his text messages, show that he was actively keeping this information from others, from law enforcement, from DFACS, from counselors, from professionals who know to look for these signs, and most especially from his dad. The state will point, and they've already mentioned to you, an incident in May of 2023 when two Jackson County sheriffs went to Mr. Gray's home to talk to Colt. Fortunately, this interaction is on body-worn camera video, so you'll get to see the whole episode. You will see that Colin Gray is cooperative. You'll see that he brings his son out. He tells the officers that he takes this kind of thing seriously. He tells the officers, you tell me that he did it and those guns are gone today. That is on video. That is undeniable. But the officers don't tell him that. The officers say that they're not sure that it was him that made the threat. He tells the officers that he has a gun in the home. He says that he has a son who is somewhat isolated, who's on the computer a lot. He says that when he was young, he used to enjoy hunting with his father, that they would go deer hunting. And so he was introducing Colt to deer hunting, that they had gone out a year before. Colt had killed his first deer, that the gun that they had was for deer hunting. The gun was to get him outside, which the officer in the video approves of. Get him away from the computers. That's good. But Colin tells the officers, if you think this is him, tell me, because those guns are gone today. And that is not what he's told. It shows that Colin, had he known, would have removed those guns, but he didn't. Let's talk about what Colin actually did, because this case is being framed as if Colin Gray didn't do anything. The evidence will show the opposite. You will hear that when the family transitioned schools, it was Colin Gray who registered Colt. You will hear that Colin Gray worked full time, was raising 3 kids on his own due to his the kids' mother's addiction problems, due to DFAC saying that she was not allowed to have unsupervised contact with him, due to the courts in Barrow County saying she was not even allowed in the same county where these kids lived. Colin was doing everything. Colin is the one that filled out the counseling referral forms. Colin is the one that communicated with the school counselor. Colin's the one who discussed the evaluation. Colin was the one who was coordinating mental health services through the school. Colin is the one that filled out the paperwork to get the assessment done on September the 5th. You'll hear that the school had arranged, and it had already been taken care of, that Colin had completed everything he needed to for the assessment. You're going to hear from the grandmother who says that they wanted to take him to Advantage Behavioral in Athens, that it was urgent. This comes out after the shooting. The grandmother will also tell you she had absolutely no idea that Colt had any interest in Nicholas Cruz or school shootings in general until after the shooting happened and they were making the 4.5-hour trip from Fitzgerald, her and her daughter Marcy, at which point Marcy said, well, Colt does like this school shooter named Nicholas Cruz. That's the first time that you hear Debbie learns any of that. You're going to see text messages from Debbie in August and September of 2024 when she says that they were so strongly trying to get him into a facility. What you're not going to see in those text messages is any urgency on Debbie's part. You're not going to see anything from Debbie saying, get the guns out of the house. You're not going to say anything from Debbie saying, I'm worried about Colt. We need to get him there today. Nothing. They don't talk about it at all. Debbie doesn't mention it one bit. Now, she mentions it in hindsight after the fact, and Marcy does the same thing. Who is Colin Gray? He's a working father raising 3 kids by himself. He had responsibilities. He had a job. He had a family to keep afloat. He had 2 other kids besides Colt. He was involved. You'll see his text messages to his children. You'll see his text messages to Colt. This is not a parent who's turning his back on what's going on right in front of him. Let's talk about what you're not going to hear. Because sometimes what you don't hear in a case like this is just as important as what you do. Sometimes the absence of evidence tells you more than the evidence itself. You will not hear a text message where Colt says to his dad, I'm going to shoot a school. I'm bringing a gun tomorrow. I have a plan. I'm going to hurt someone. You won't see a single message like that. You will not hear that Colt ever told his father about the notes on his iPhone. You will not hear that Colt ever showed his father a plan. You will not hear that Colt told his father he was accelerating the plan. You will not hear that anyone called Colin Gray and said, your son is about to commit a shooting. You will not hear that law enforcement told him your son made a credible threat. You will not hear a school official warn him his mental health treatment is imminent. He needs to see someone today. You will not hear anyone from DFACS told him we have serious concerns that he's violent, that he's going to hurt someone else. You will not hear anyone say that they contacted the police on September 3rd and said there's a school shooting about to happen. You will not hear that Colin Gray encouraged violence. You will not hear that he glorified violence. You will not hear that he dismissed a specific credible threat. In fact, you'll hear something entirely different. You'll hear that Colt suffered from anxiety. You'll hear that Colt suffered from depression. You'll hear about his panic attacks. You'll hear that he didn't like going to school. These are serious issues, but these are not the same as homicidal ideations. These are not the same as suicidal ideations. These are not the same thing as proof of a probable school shooting. The state will ask you to connect dots after the fact using hindsight, dots that became visible only after the shooting itself. But what you will not hear is evidence that at the time, Colin had sufficient warning that this outcome was probable, not imaginable, not possible, but probable. That Colin knew that his son would harm someone else. You'll hear testimony from Colt Gray's counselor. And that's important because it gives you a professional's perspective on what was going on with Colt in the weeks leading up to the shooting. You will hear that Colt presented as a student suffering from anxiety and emotional instability, panic symptoms, an inability to function in class. And you'll hear something very important. You will hear that even the school counselor, a professional trained, did not perceive Colt as a threat. She described him as nice, respectful. That matters because if a trained counselor did not perceive the imminent violence, then it's unreasonable to claim that the father should have seen it himself. You'll also hear testimony from her about how the father did in fact take steps to get him mental health treatment. The father was in communication with the counselor. The father submitted the paperwork. The father completed the referral, and the father was pursuing intervention. You'll hear the therapist was essentially scheduled to meet with Colt the very next day. The father was not ignoring the problem. Colin Gray was acting. They want you to hold him responsible because they don't think he was acting fast enough. You'll hear from his daughter, Colt's sister, Jenny Gray. Her testimony will corroborate concealment that Colt was perpetrating on his family, on his dad. She'll testify that Colt was secretive, that he was constantly deleting and opening new accounts on Discord to avoid detection, that he was using usernames that were combinations of alphanumeric combinations. You'll find that he would not discuss, based on the statement that Jenny gave on September 4th of 2024, that he would not discuss school shootings or school shooters in front of his father. You will hear in the morning of the shooting, Colin Gray had already left home. You will hear that Colt, when he did discuss school shooters with Jenny, made her promise not to tell his dad. You'll hear that morning on September the 4th, Colin Gray got up and took his youngest son, Coley Jr., to school, that he left before Jenny and Colt did to catch the bus. You will hear that Colt had to go and find the gun because it wasn't in his room, that he had to find the ammunition that wasn't in his room, and that he had to put them in his backpack, and that he had to conceal the rifle that stuck out of his backpack 18 to 24 inches with a poster board. And he put a hat on top of it. It proves concealment, it proves independent action, and that matters because it's consistent with what Colt had done the whole time, which was conceal this plan from his father. Remember, the state says that he knew. They said that he knew this was going to happen. That he knew, not that it was possible, that he knew Colt was going to go and harm someone else. But you can't consciously disregard a risk that you're not aware of. And you can't say something is probable when it's being hidden from you. You're going to see text message. They've already discussed some of the messages. We're going to discuss some of the other ones. We're going to talk about why they matter. There are hundreds of text messages between Colin Gray and his son. These texts matter because they show the reality in real time of what was happening and what Colin would have thought and what Colin would have known at that time. Not now, but at that time. They also show what Colt chose not to disclose. You'll see a father checking on his son on a daily basis, checking on school attendance. Did you make it to school? How's your day going? How was your day? What are you doing after class? You'll see encouragement. I'm proud of you. I love you. You're a good young man. This is not an absent father. This is not a father not paying attention to his child. You'll see daily involvement. You'll see a father trying to keep a teenager engaged and connected to school. You'll see a father trying to build the confidence and self-esteem of his son. You will see this all in the text messages. You'll see their discussions about mental health, about depression, which is not homicidal ideation, about anxiety, which is not homicidal ideation, about anxiety, panic attacks, which are not homicidal ideation. You'll see a father trying to stabilize a situation at home. You will not see threats to harm other folks. You will not see threats to harm other people. You will not see, I'm going to shoot up the school. I'm bringing a gun. I have a plan. I'm going to harm someone. There needs to be proof that Colin Gray knew what Colt was going to do and knew that Colt was going to harm someone. The text messages show something else as well. They show that Colt was capable of living a double life. He could text his father, love you, and have a good day, while simultaneously writing plans on his phone about shooting up the school. He could talk about liking school. School was good. The kids here are mature, referring to the Apalachee High School. They gave me a nickname. The teacher said I'm the tech guy. And you'll hear Colin respond happily that his son seems to be finding his way for the first time in a while in school. He could talk, Colt, about school being good, about having a good day, and what they're going to have for dinner, while also planning on how to sneak a rifle into the school. That's not something a father can foresee. He asked about ammunition. You'll hear evidence that they went to the gun range. You'll hear evidence that he taught his son safety. You will not hear evidence that Colt requested ammunition because he was getting ready to do a school shooting. That conversation is not a threat. There's no mention of harming anyone else. There's no talk of a timeline. The state's going to ask you to interpret these ordinary messages with extraordinary hindsight. But the law does not allow hindsight convictions. You're tasked with determining what Colin Gray knew in the months leading up to the shooting. It requires proof of what he specifically knew at that time. You'll hear from the mother, Marcy Gray. She'll try to convince you that she warned everyone and no one listened. The evidence will show that she did not share the most important information she knew about Colt with Colin. You've already heard their relationship was not smooth. You heard that DFACS took the kids from her. You'll hear that they were separated. You'll hear that the kids had to come up here for the DFACS order. You'll hear that she drove up here after telling her mother she was going to murder Colin. came up here, keyed his cars, got arrested, and then was told by the judge, you can't come back to Barrow County. You'll see evidence in text messages between Colt and his mom. You will see in these text messages, Colt telling his mom prior to the shooting that he had created a Securus online profile that he was using by making up a fake age to try and get in contact with Nicholas Cruz in prison down in Florida. He will text her that he had emailed Nicholas Cruz a couple times, and he'd even put money on his commissary. Marcy's response is to ask him where he got the money. And he tells Marcy in a text message, I told Dad it was to buy a video game on Steam. To which Marcy responds with a laughing out loud emoji. Marcy knew that he had this interest in Nicholas Cruz, but she did not share it with Colin. Immediately after this conversation, you will not see a text message from Marcy to Colin say, hey, did you know he's been emailing a mass murderer in Florida? Did you know that he put money on this mass murderer's commissary account that he told you was for a video game? She doesn't share any of that with Colin. She keeps that to herself. She does not reply immediately after to Colin or tell him, hey, this is what's going on. We got to get the guns out of the house now. No, she responds with a laughing out loud emoji. That's how serious she took it. She didn't think anything was going to happen. Remember, the evidence will show that even she, with the information that he did not have, did not believe there was an imminent threat and did not believe that Colt would harm anyone else. She didn't call law enforcement. She didn't seek an emergency mental health evaluation. And you'll hear evidence that after the shooting, her conduct is inconsistent with what she tells the police. You'll hear evidence that even after the fact, she's still trying to assist him in contacting school shooters and amplifying his profile across true crime community websites. And that matters because credibility matters and bias matters. You will see that the state is asking you to convict Colin largely based on a hindsight narrative provided by witnesses who are not credible, that did not recognize the warning signs in real time. You will hear from the victims in this case. Their testimony will be emotional. And it's important to understand what happened inside that school. But respectfully, their testimony will not establish what Colin Gray knew and didn't know. They can't tell you what was said in the home. They can't tell you what was concealed. They can't tell you what was sent in text messages. And they can't tell you what warnings were communicated to Colin Gray. We're not going to dispute the horror of what happened. We're not going to dispute that they were harmed, that they were physically harmed and mentally harmed. But that's not proof that he was negligent. That is not proof that he knew what was in Colt's heart, that he knew what Colt was planning, and that he knew that Colt was going to harm someone else. The law doesn't punish what is possible. The law does not punish what is conceivable. He is charged with knowing what would happen. He is charged with knowing his son would harm someone else. In life, almost anything is possible. It's possible that a teenager who's angry might get into a fight. It's possible that a teenager who's depressed might run away or make up excuses not to go to school. It's possible that a teenager who's anxious might break something or act out. But this is not a case about whether something bad is possible. This is a case about whether or not Colin Gray knew Colt was going to take a gun to that school and harm other people. That matters, because if the standard becomes it could have happened, then the law becomes limitless. If the standard becomes you should have imagined the worst, then every parent becomes criminally liable for what a teenager might do. But that's not the standard. The standard is proof. Proof that Colin Gray knew, that he consciously disregarded, not a vague fear, not a general worry, but a risk that made this tragedy. That he knew Colt was going to go to that school. That he knew what the counselor didn't, what the DFACS professionals who had met with Colt didn't. The state will ask you to look at the outcome and then work backward to say, because this happened, it must have been foreseeable. But the law doesn't allow hindsight to substitute for evidence. That's why you're going to hear about what was actually known at that time, and most importantly, what was actually hidden from Colin Gray at that time. Because when someone conceals a plan, deceives the people around them, acts independently, the law does not allow us to pretend that the people left behind should have seen through all of it. They're going to say that common sense means you should have seen this coming. And guns are serious, and this tragedy is serious. But the law is serious too. This case is not about whether or not firearms are dangerous in the abstract. It's about whether Colin Gray, based upon what he actually knew, failed to act because he knew that his son was going to go to that school and commit these acts. In a case like this, there's a natural human instinct. When something this awful happens, we want an explanation. We want someone to blame. We want a story that makes sense so that we can take steps to make sure something like this never happens again. It's very easy and it's very human to look at the end result and believe that someone somewhere must have known. But the evidence in this case is going to show something that's deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes the truth is that the person who committed the act was hiding it. Sometimes the truth is that a family can be struggling, a child can be spiraling, and people can try to get that child mental health help. And still, something unthinkable can happen. It's not satisfying and it doesn't give anyone peace. But the criminal courtroom is not here to provide a scapegoat. It's here to provide justice. Being a juror, providing justice, that requires discipline. It requires that we do not convict someone because we're horrified. It requires that we do not convict someone because we wish they would have seen it coming. It requires that we do not convict someone because we feel like there must be some accountability somewhere. The state has chosen to put the father on trial for what the son did. And at the end of this case, you'll be asked to decide whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Colin Gray knew his son would go to that school and commit these violent acts. And at the end of this trial, you will find the state cannot prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. And we will ask you to return the only verdict that the evidence can support, which is not guilty on all counts for Colin Gray. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before the first witness is called, I'm going to go ahead and take a 10 to 15 minute restroom break. Just recall the prior instructions, do not to discuss the case, save that for deliberations. All right, we can recess for 10 to 15 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And I'm going to shut this off for now. I'm going to end the feed there. I will recap for you the various witnesses that are put on today, but I did not agree with this defense lawyer. You do not have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this guy actually had actual knowledge that his son was going to go into this school and shoot it up. He had a shrine to Nicholas Cruz. Now I'm gonna go. There is a timeline on the internet. I'm gonna pull out this timeline because what I'm interested in and what I'll be listening for during this testimony is what did mom know versus what did dad know, because they're living in separate places. Was the shrine at her house and not at his house? Anyway, if I know that my son is like looking at school shooters, I'm going to take the gun away. You don't, first of all, the kid is mentally deteriorating, and you go and you buy him a gun so you can take him deer hunting that will fix his mental problem. No, I'm not buying that. Tragic, horrific, heartbreaking. I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, you've got a kid who's cutting himself, violent. He's not going to school. You're medicating him with someone else's antidepressants. Hello. It says, I didn't mean to push all your buttons. I was just looking for mute. This is my Joanna shirt. I just pressed the mute button. There you go. Mute, mute, mute. So, and I'm going to have to look at the law. Does the law, first of all, he's charged with second-degree murder, which means we're not looking for malice here. In other words, we're not looking for premeditation on the part of the father. So, so we got to look at the way that those statutes are worded as to what, do we have to prove actual knowledge? I don't know. He only attended 5 days of school. What the heck was going on with school with this kid? Yeah. And then I wrote down some stuff about the timeline, but I'm sure I missed a lot. But wow. And how is he hiding this? Underneath his clothing with a back? Like, if I'm just trying to picture a teacher who hasn't seen this kid in she's only seen this kid for 5 days for the school year. And he walks in on his 5th day with clutching his backpack, and he's sitting wherever he's sitting. But that's very suspicious. I'd be like, wait a minute, hold on, red flag, red flag. Yeah. Anyway, it's an interesting case, but the prosecutor starts off by saying, this is not about parental responsibility. Excuse me. It's all about parental responsibility. Teenagers are crazy. Teenagers are little nutbags, and you're going to go buy them a rifle, an assault rifle? I'm sorry. No. I just don't agree with it. I'm sorry. And if you do, and he starts to mentally deteriorate to the point where he's cutting himself, he's not going to school, mom's concerned, take the gun away. It takes 5 minutes. You go find the gun, you lock it up. With the poster sticking out. And asking, have we had an active shooter drill lately? Oh, no. Okay, the kid that hasn't been to school all year just walks in and he's clutching his backpack. And he's like, have you had an active shooter drill here? Red flag, red flag, red flag. Okay, I'm sorry. And who left the door unlocked for that classroom? Good Lord. Because it was one classroom that was locked and another one that wasn't. And, here we go again with these doors not being locked. In any case, so if you would like to watch the rest on your own, please feel free. I'm not going to sit and put the rest on live. I will recap what happens in the rest of the testimony in tomorrow's show on Tuesday. And we are still on verdict watch in this murder case of the Edric Faust for Tara Baker. But I'm guessing there's no court today. I think it's a holiday. Isn't it President's Day or something? But this is in Georgia. Like, we're having court in one Georgia courtroom, but not another. Because I don't know that they're deliberating. I'm trying to find if they are deliberating in this other case. Hold on. I don't see the thumbnail that I found. They're not live yet on it. And I'm not sure why. Yeah. It says 11:30 they're going to start. I guess the jury just wanted to get started later on. All right, so we don't go on verdict watch until 11:30. So I will put a thumbnail up for the verdict watch. So we'll go live when we have a verdict in that case. So otherwise, I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.